Hey everybody, welcome to my live stream. We're talking bugs again tonight, and everybody should be excited that I now have a boom microphone stand. Isn't this cool? Alright, it's not cool, but anyways, set me back I think $25. So last week I was starting to do some poly painting with our friend the Bumblebee here. This is Bombus sonorans, and this is something I've been working on the past few weeks. So this is mostly a black bee with some yellow on it. Obviously a lot of fur. Might try and play a little bit with fiber mesh to do at least the fur on the back to see how it goes. But this is where we're at now. So I'm going to continue poly painting with this, and feel free to ask questions. And I will answer them as best as I can, as usual. So let's take a look at the mandibles here. So I did this mandible last time, so I got this one to do. And as usual, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a dark black or blue. Let me set up my paint brushes here. So I'm going to get use the paintbrush. Here we set the RGB intensity to something like 70. I'm going to hold the shift key, turn off Z add so that it is a blur brush instead of a smooth brush. So it won't affect the sculpt, it'll only affect the poly paint. And then the first thing I'm going to do is fill this with that black color. So choose color, fill object. Let's make sure that poly paint is on. Yes, it is. Let's make sure that I actually have the black color. If you hold the C key and click on your object, that's like the paint dropper or the select color operation. So do color, fill object. There we go. Let me do it a couple times. And then kind of like what I've done on these other parts of the model, you can see I've got a little bit of like a bluish color in there. If you ever want to see just the straight up RGB values, you can always choose the flat color. That'll show you, well, the flat color. So you can see this is where we're at right now. So not a whole lot of detail in here, but you know, just enough to be dangerous. And so I'm going to go down here to the masking. And like I always do, I'm going to do a cavity mask. Mask by cavity and mask by cavity. Probably won't be very visible. I'm going to press Control H to hide the mask and then choose this lighter sort of off blue color and fill it in. Let's actually do the black color because it's easier to see. So I think I'm going to invert the mask and fill in with a darker black. Filling material? No, it should just be RGB. All right, something like that. And then as you can see, I've got kind of this little dullish, yellowish, brown kind of color that you can kind of see in some of the parts here. Let's see if we can find a better image here for reference. This is a dead bee. I bet you can see there's, you know, on certain parts of the anatomy, you'll find this kind of yellowish hint, especially on the edges, like on the legs here. So I like to bring that in to kind of help accentuate the forms of the model, as well as, you know, be accurate. So a lot of reds and yellows and oranges hinted at here on the edges. Let's see. Here's a live bee, but it's not a very good picture. It's a fine picture. It's just not very good resolution. That's a honeybee. That's a nice one. Okay. Still dead, but at least it's a decent close-up. So just give you an idea what I'm thinking when I'm doing this kind of stuff. So I'm going to use a color spray, set my color variation to 0. Maybe get an alpha like this one. Make sure I clear my mask. And also I don't want lazy mouse. There we go. Hey Art, how are you doing? Thanks for kind of joining us. Get some lighter yellows in there. Your reference is kind of getting in the way here. It's a sort of hint at the kind of almost a subsurface-like quality, and you can do that by doing. This has nothing to do with the material subsurface. I'm just kind of creating a subsurface effect with the poly painting by painting some strokes and then blurring it using the blur brush, the smooth brush, and getting a nice blend in there. And then you just kind of layer on sort of blurred colors with a little bit more detail, and you keep doing that, and a few times you start to get something that looks like there's a little bit of depth to the surface and the colors here. Let's get a little bit of a reddish color in there. And then I can bring in some of the darker hues, maybe a little bit purplish kind of thing. You know, subtle variations is always something that makes it look much more authentically organic. You know, and bring some of that color up here to these parts. Let's turn off the solo button, make sure that they're still I'm going to switch over to this mandible because I kind of like what's going on here, and maybe bring some of that kind of quality over here as well. Thank you. Poly painting is actually one of my favorite parts of the process. And I do use Substance as well. Somebody was asking me about why I don't just do this in Substance, but I like ZBrush's poly painting tools. I just usually just use ZBrush for base color. Put down the Z draw size a little bit. Also, I don't really worry about getting exact hues on different parts of the body. I'm trying to get them in the same family, but without going crazy about making sure that the RGB value right here matches the one right here, because that's not very interesting, and I like it to, as long as it looks good and, you know, reasonably consistent, I think that's fine, but a little bit of variation or asymmetrical variation is also nice too. Things look too symmetrical, they look artificial. Okay, bring some of that purple back. Very, very dark purple. Make sure I'm actually painting on this. There we go. I think for now that's good for the head, so I'm going to save this. Mouth parts are kind of fun because they're a bit more brighter colors. So they're going to stand as a nice contrast to what's going on with the head. I mean, not real bright, but you see, I know I got some nice images here. Yeah, something like this. This is kind of stuff I love, is the dark blacks fading into this yellowish orange gradient right here, making it look very translucent. So that's this part right here. So we're gonna have a lot of reds there. So I'm gonna fill it with very dark black. Yeah, I think you'll really find that, in my opinion, I mean, I've been doing poly painting for a very, very long time, since before Substance even came on the scene, so I'm biased towards it. But what I think you'll find with the blur brush is that it's much more sensitive in ZBrush, at least in my opinion, than say in, blurring in Substance. And if you're used to using the smooth brush and you kind of know how it works, then it just feels natural. It's going to be very subtle on this because I'm doing very, some dark colors, but it's really cool when you just do layers of successive blurring, to get this kind of thing. So I'm just going to see, I'm getting this dark color up here. And also I'm using the Skin Shade 4 material, which is just a nice white material, and that makes it easier to see the colors while you get a little bit of specular highlight. And it kind of gives a subsurfacey quality. Well, it does look alien, but of course, I'm going to point out the fact that Hymenoptera and bees have been around longer than Homo sapiens, so we're the aliens. Or at least we're the newcomers. Ants split off from wasps about 50 million years ago, and I think bees were around a little bit before that. Deep red in here. Then, okay, so here's where the blurring comes in handy, where you can just draw and then blur and a little bit more and blur some more. You get a nice gradual gradient in there. I'm going to turn up the RGB intensity to 100 so the blur is stronger. So you can adjust the strength of the blur by using the RGB intensity. And then I'm going to make the thinner parts lighter color. Pale yellow in here. Bring down the RGB intensity of my paintbrush. It's also nice to experiment with different alphas. Sometimes I'll use this ring alpha. and then blur it, with the spray stroke. All right, it's not doing much here, but let's get a darker color on top there. What's going on, UK? I'm across the channel from you over here in France. You can tell I'm French because of my outrageous accent. Let's do a little cavity masking here. Let's get a little surface noise going. Let's look at a little plastic right now. Which is okay, but I'm going to do mask by noise and then hide that noise. Let's go back to this. Invert the mask. And let's do a little bit of additional masking here. I'm going to go in here and do some mask by cavity. Let's see. Try mask by smoothness. Mask by curvature. Peaks and valleys. Let's do smoothness. I kind of like the way that looks. I'll get the dark color going. And before, when I was working on the Katydid a few weeks ago, I was doing more layers with the poly painting. I'm not doing as layers tonight. I'm just kind of fooling around in a single layer. But I feel like I kind of lost the magic I had a few minutes ago is kind of fading. So I think we're going to go back in time. Let's do that. And we'll just do one more pass here. With no masks. Yeah, I think I'm overdoing it at this point, so I might leave this part alone, and it's better in context. Let's work on these guys right here. These want to start with a really black. And then I'll pick some of this reddish orange. Kind of like this abrupt change. So I've got kind of a layer of orange going there. So now I'm going to bring in some of that pale yellow. And you get some like little dark red splotches. I'm going to turn off symmetry because these guys are very symmetrical. And let's see. I think that looks pretty good for now. Click the mask on it and see it in context. So we can always come back to it a little bit later, but and then for the glossa, this is going to be more red to yellow. This is not very, let's see. Look at about 16,000 points on it, so I'm going to divide it a few times. Yeah, maybe up 271,000, something like that. What are we drinking tonight? We're drinking ZBrush. ZBrush tea. All right. Thank you very much. Oh, good question. The old AI thing. Yeah, it depends on the week. You ask me. Some days I'm like okay with AI. Some days I really can't stand it. Today I'm feeling kind of less than excited about AI. I mean, you know, there's the obvious problem with job creation. I mean, basically, we already have a saturated job market in CG, so that's bad enough. And it's a global saturation. It's from every country. And tools are easier than they used to be. So that's making things difficult. With globalization, of course, you can, if you're working at a studio in Los Angeles, this happens to me all the time, you know, they'll work up to a certain point and ship the rest of it off to Asia or another place where the labor is cheaper, and they would finish the shots for you, so you're losing work. So you have all those things to deal with, and then on top of that, of course, you have AI. And I think that the upper echelons of the industry, the suits as it were, are very excited about AI because they're only interested in profits and that kind of thing. So anything that can cut costs, they're going to get excited about. It's kind of funny because I heard a comment today. Somebody's saying we have to try and keep AI out of the hands of the super rich. I'm like, who do you think has it right now? There's no working class AI, you know. It's all in the hands of the super rich, you know. That's who's getting rich off of it. But anyways, I think today, you know, some of the issues that I have with it, of course, is that, you know, with everything with mechanization, you know, it takes the joy out of the actual work. You know, it's like something that I think as artists, now I'm speaking specifically in the art realm and not in the realm of industry. So I'm talking about just artistically. You know, one of the things that you enjoy when you look at your favorite artist's work, whether it's a musician, author, or whatever, is that you sense the joy that they put into their work. That's part of it. The AI doesn't experience joy. It might be able to simulate it to a certain extent, but it can't experience it. And so for that doesn't come across to you. The only thing you can do is rip off other artists who might feel joy. And I think that's something that's going to be missing for people like us who really care about this stuff. For the general public, they might not care. You know, they're getting entertained. That's all they care about. You know, I always try and remind people that the main purpose of the film industry is to give families someplace to go with air conditioning during the summer. You know, take the kids and sit in a dark room and enjoy the air conditioning for a while. I mean, that's kind of a super cynical take, but you know what I'm saying? It's like the general public doesn't care, but then also I think there's there's so many layers to the problem that it's not just one opinion. I think the other thing is part of the backlash is that people are going to feel cheated. You know, it's been interesting. I've been following a lot of the controversy with the sort of so-called fake guitarists on Instagram and stuff like that. People who sort of mime their work, you know, pre-record a performance and then, you know, videotape themselves miming to it, which is not that different from what people have been doing on TV shows for decades now. But people get pissed off at this because they feel like they've been cheated. You know, and with AI, you know, you might see something you think is really cool, and then you find out, well, it's just spat out by a computer because somebody typed in a bunch of stuff in a prompt. You kind of feel cheated, and that builds a sort of resentment in the community. And I don't think that's really harmful, because then the other problem, as you guys know, I'm sure everybody has experienced this, where you post some of your artwork, maybe something that you've really been excited about and were working on for a while, CG artwork, and then somebody who doesn't know anything about ZBrush or anything about CG, well, first thing they'll say is like, you used AI, didn't you? It's like when people say everything is Photoshop, even when they're looking at a 3D model or something. You know, AI is the new way of saying, oh, that's just Photoshop. You know, and it's very hurtful when you know it's something that is not AI. But on the positive side of things, it does also, in terms of making filmmaking more accessible. A smaller team can put together a film because you can use AI to do the more laborious stuff, and that can be a good thing. So, for example, somebody who may not be the greatest coder in the world can come up with a quick script using AI to help them do the coding, or create, passable storyboards. Maybe they might not look like the greatest storyboards in the world, but for a simple task, they might be useful. And I've even talked to actual professional storyboard artists who blended using AI into their work. So some of them are actually using it already. Yeah, I know. It's like when you call yourself an AI artist, I mean, I hate to sound like a cynical, old, grumpy musician, but it's, I actually went to school. Believe it or not, I was a classically trained musician before I got into doing CG. So I spent a lot of time at a practice rooms practicing scales. And so when I see like a DJ, even though there are some DJs I really like DJ Shadow, sometimes it's just like somebody spinning records on there and saying they're a musician. It stings a little bit. And it's much worse with an AI artist, because you're right, somebody typing in a prompt and saying, look, I'm an artist. Because AI is was it Joe Strummer used to say, it's like the blandification. It's taking all the things that you should be doing. In other words, if you want to say the rule of thirds, Fibonacci, whatever, golden rule and everything, all the stuff that you're supposed to do to make a good composition, is throwing that in there. And it just blands everything, because the rules are a very good way to start, a great place to start from when you're doing art, but they're a departure point as well, because truly the art that really moves us is the stuff that bends the rules. And AI I don't think at this point is very good at doing that. When I was looking on Instagram and I saw that there was obviously some AI slop, this, fantasy book that some AI computer spat out along with illustrations. And I've experimented using AI with creative writing, and AI is just not a very good writer. It might write the grammar correct, but it doesn't capture the essence of character or dialogue or any of that kind of stuff very well. It just does the baseline stuff. And it's the same thing with art, It's just because it's basically, the way I see it, I'm not an expert in how AI technology works, but it seems like it's just aggressively scouring the internet or whatever it's been trained on, or a combination of that, and slapping it together and then spitting out a result. And so I think that's why it all kind of looks the same and kind of looks blandification. But I think on the other hand, it's not going away, and so I think it is useful to understand it, and useful to learn it, to understand it, and also see where it might be useful. Like, for instance, if you need to do a quick sculpt, you can have AI churn out some concept art for you really quickly, just to get something going, and then use that as a starting point for a sculpt. Or if you just wanted to practice sculpting, right, and you want to practice doing fantasy characters, have AI spit out a few images of fantasy characters, and then see if you can take those as a reference and go into ZBrush and then use them as a study. I think those are useful ways to use AI. You're still making your own model. It's still your model, but you just basically, it's you're taking the work away from a concept artist, obviously. But if you're just using it for the purpose of study or whatever, I think that could be useful. It's the same thing as it's not the same thing, but it's similar to if you go and find your favorite concept artist on ArtStation and then do a model based on their art. It could be sort of similar to that, but as an alternative. So I don't know, but we're gonna have to deal with it. It's not going away, and so we have to find ways to make peace with it. I think that the thing is that the audience is going to get pretty savvy to what's AI and what's not AI, and they're going to start to recognize patterns in AI that they don't like, and it's going to create sort of a sort of a resentment. I mean, a good example is like for the old farts out there, if you remember Milli Vanilli, you know, lip syncing, or who was the Ashley Simpson or whoever on Saturday Night Live, you know. It's interesting. It's like, why was there such a backlash to those people lip syncing when in other contexts lip syncing was perfectly normal and accepted? It's like you go back and watch other performances that we all knew it was lip sync, but we didn't care. But for some reason, I guess it's you know, there's just something about it or in a context that people don't like, you know. Yeah, I don't think anything's going to stop AI at this point. I think humans have to adapt and find the ways that they like to use it and to find it acceptable. I've used it for generating really fast storyboards or really fast concept art, and it's kind of cool. It helps you narrow down an idea. And I've used it a little bit in creative writing, but I've found that the AI stuff just writes, it's a terrible writer. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It's like where do you start or where do you stop? If you're just using the prompt and generating something AI and then posting it and saying, there you go, that's my art, that's finished product. I don't know. That's kind of lame. Oh God, I posted a fan art commercial for Magnum ice cream. It took me 2 months to finish, and people asked me what AI model I used. When I said it's CG, they told me I wasted my time. Oh God, that's pretty harsh, man. That's not fun at all. But you know, you did get a lot out of it. It just sucks that people have that kind of reaction. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of CG haters out there in general, you know, and that's been going on for a while. And that always kind of irritates me when we had the people who's just like, oh, you know, movies were so much better when it was all practical effects. I'm like, really? I grew up in the 80s. I'm Gen X. I remember what it was like. You had 1 out of every 20 movies that had anything that was even not laughable. You know, I mean, most visual effects back in the day were absolutely horrible. If you go back and watch the original Terminator, where he's doing surgery on his eye, it wouldn't fly by today's standard, even on TV. You're just like, oh my God, that's just so goofy looking. But at the time, that was like the top. That was the best. You could not get better than that. And it's cool in sort of a nostalgic sense to look at it, but it's like, I think that's the problem. People are getting lost in nostalgia and they feel threatened by CG, and so they kind of take it out on CG artists and say how visual effects and CG is ruining movies. But it's always to come down to the director. It's the director who ruins the movies. Because, you know, I think the thing about directors is that they should always be the first people to blame when things go wrong. It seems sort of unfair, but, you know, it's their job to maintain control of the project. And if they let the visual effects take over and, you know, get in the way of the story and take you out of the story, then they should get the blame for it, not the visual effects artists, you know? You see a mask by cavity. Yeah, I think for what Dope Boy is experiencing is partially that sort of resentment towards CG. I don't think it's a waste of time at all, because every time you do something like that, you get a little bit better and you learn a little bit more about yourself, and that's the most important thing, because at the end of the day, your art is really for you, you know, unless you're doing it for a paycheck. It's really what you get out of it. Nobody's going to care about your art as much as you are. It's just the truth. Let's subdivide this a couple times. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this part because it's underside of the bee. It's not going to be very visible. So I'm just going to bring in some colors here. Now to get to the thorax, because that's much more interesting. In fact, I might just skip to that right now. I just call that good enough for now. Let's come back to it later. Let's save this sucker. Yeah, there is something about the AI art that you know what I'm saying? You see it and you instantly know it's AI art. Like I've noticed like a lot of YouTubers who are not artists, political stuff and all that kind of things are using a lot of AI generated art. And it's annoying because they're showing, let's not get into politics here, but let's say political figure A with a rage on his face, or he's crying, or he's freaking out, or something like that, and they're trying to create the impression that this guy is freaking out. And I'm like, but they would never do that, and they probably aren't freaking out, and there's something super phony about it. But there's a quality to the lighting and the shading and everything, and the shadows that just, it starts to grate on your nerves. It's like, I don't know. But you instantly recognize it when you see it. Leaves like bad taste in your mouth, Let's take a look at our thorax, absolute real bee. Here's a thorax. It's a big ball of fuzz, so there's not really a good reason to get super detailed in the color here, because this could be colored by fur. But we can use the color on here, like, my plan is to bring this model eventually into Blender and then do the rendering of the fur from there, and you should be able to use the colors from the textures into the fur. I've done that with Yeti. I haven't used Blender for that much, but I'm using this excuse to learn it. So what I'll do is I'll color the object, and I'll put the yellow where I want the yellow fur to be. John Henry. Yeah, I mean, it's like really AI is exceptional at doing clip art, But that really sucks, Violet, that you're losing work to it, and I'm losing work to it as well. But that's going to be true for just about everybody. It's a tough transition, I mean, before photography, the only way to get a picture of yourself was to hire somebody to draw you or paint you, Here, walking around Europe and looking at all the old buildings, a lot of sculptors were employed for a long time. You can tell there's sculpture everywhere. Yeah, I think, Violet, you're right. The problem is that it comes down to how much money they want to spend. But it's kind of like, you can sort of thinking, if we're the foundation for the creative arts and the culture, if you're using AI, you're just eroding at the foundation, and sooner or later it's going to collapse, if you just fill the culture with a bunch of fake truly computer generated images, I don't think it's gonna end well. Well, that's true. When you're dealing with any kind of client in a production, You know, you guys know that they want extremely specific things, and AI might get them started in terms of like if we're talking like a sequence. Like I'm working on some stuff. I can't really say the projects that I'm working on, but specifically, but non-specifically, a lot of title sequences and other sequences where the director is going for something incredibly specific. The AI stuff, like especially the video stuff, is really good for creating something super generic. You know, a hot girl walking down the street and she shoots a gun or something like that. But when you work with a client and you know they want something like incredibly specific, the cost is going to start to lose, because it's actually still expensive to generate AI sequences, rendered sequences. Expensive the same way that rendering is expensive. But rendering, of course, is getting cheaper and cheaper because you have things like Unreal and real-time rendering and that kind of stuff. So the money that goes into rendering right now, it's starting to get less and less expensive to do that. But if you start using AI stuff, your computer has to cook, if you're talking about video sequence. And that stuff takes a lot of processing power. And so at the end of the day, you might end up with something that's okay, but not exactly what you want if you're using AI, as opposed to using a team of artists who are better at understanding what you want. Anyways, that's sort of the optimistic approach on it. Yeah, there's no intelligence. It is kit bashing, I think. Alright, I'm gonna do a different piece of music here. Yeah, it is annoying. It's like whack-a-mole. You can sit there, it's like, okay, make a female elf warrior with a bow and arrow. You get a male elf with a crossbow. No, I said a female elf with a bow and arrow. Okay, so you get a female elf, but she's got 3 fingers. And she's holding a sword. No, I said bow and arrow. Female elf. Okay. It goes back to a male elf. I mean, it's like I've experienced that before. You just can't get it to do the thing that you want it to do. Well, keep in mind that if you're a writer, all you ever needed to write a novel is a piece of paper and more than one piece of paper and a pen or a word processor or a typewriter. And sure, there's a lot of crappy writing out there, but technology has never been the barrier to that, to being able to do that. So, everyone's going to generate AI art, but it's going to all look the same. It's going to be the same kind of, well, I think slop is one of the best terms they've used for it. I don't think you can come up with a better term than slop, and people are already having a massively negative reaction to slop. So yeah, a lot of people are going to play with slop, but it's also the thing about when you get something for free, you tend not to value it as much, and so you don't use it as much. It's like just kind of mixing yellows in here. I don't know if it's how much this is going to affect the actual color, but if things come too easy to people, then they don't value it very much. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those of us who still work at it, creating art, are going to be completely overlooked. It just means it's going to be much harder to make a living at it. Just like being a photographer right now, since everybody has a high quality digital camera on their phone, being a professional photographer, making a full-time living is nearly impossible. I know some photographers who just can't do it anymore because They don't value it. People don't value it anymore. They don't want to pay for it. Well, the future is unwritten. You don't have to necessarily limit yourself, but I think working on becoming a better artist is the most important thing. Making connections is very important. You'd be surprised at the things that people can do to make a living. There's also, it's using AI, and the sort of the positive spin would be you can do more. So one artist can create a graphic novel by themselves with the help of AI, as opposed to a team of artists, or maybe a short film or something like that. But once again, if things come too easy, the film can suffer. I don't know. I'm kind of babbling. Trying to be positive. Mask by cavity. Invert that mask, and just let's fill this with a dark. Do that. I'm going to save this real quick. Let's do aspect smoothness. If you're out there in the wild talking to other people, non-artists, you can start to realize that, AI is going to affect everybody. It's not just us. I have friends who are real estate agents who are worried about losing their work to AI. You'd be surprised at how many different industries it can negatively affect. And I think most people, I wouldn't say that necessarily people have to work so much, but people do need a purpose. That's a very human thing. It's an ant thing as well, but it's an extremely human thing to feel, to base your self-worth on having a purpose. And if AI starts taking people's purpose away, it leaves a void psychologically, and that is a really dangerous thing. That's where you get things like extremism, because people are looking for a purpose, and if they feel that they are not useful or not worth anything, then, well, they tend to get stabby. I think the people who run the AI, they're all going to be living in bunkers, so maybe they don't care, but it's definitely something to be concerned about. I'm going to try an experiment here real quick. There's some fiber mesh. I took the gravity Now, if I've known from way back when that we can use a polypaint color to affect. There we go. I knew you could do it. That's kind of a nice way to preview what it might look with fur. So basically set the base colorize up to 1. And the tip colorize, let's bring that up to 1 as well. No. And bring the base colorize down to 0. Color variation. Sometimes I think they can make these things a little bit more obvious. You know, color by polypaint might be a little bit easier button to have here. That gives you an idea, sort of an idea. Hola, Mexico. How you guys doing? I think that there is a lot of hype in the AI community right now. I think you're right, Nick. I've seen, sorry about the slurping there. I've seen a few videos that are just saying that people need to kind of pump the brakes a little bit on hyping AI too much. That's the other danger of AI, is people believing it too much, that it is smart, then they give it more credit than it deserves. And we know that doesn't work for people very well, so. Okay, so I think the final bee, if I render it in Blender or Maya or whatever, is not going to look like this. But the nice thing about fiber mesh, it gives you an idea of, you know, the colors, what they look like in fur form. This is a nice preview. So that's kind of cool. I think what I might do, let's clear the mask, because I'm going to sample some of this bluish color here. And just gonna cover a little bit to bring it in here. Adding a little bit of dark blue to black makes it look extra black for some reason, in my opinion. It also gives a subtle variation that makes it much more interesting than just straight up black. Anytime you're thinking about doing a creature, you could always go online to like Sketchfab or Fab or whatever it is now. See if you can find some insect scan data. There's some free ones that you can get. They're not as good as the stuff that I've been using, but they're decent. But you can always grab a part of an insect model, like an insect scan, cut it up, and then use it as a starting point for, because this would make a really cool looking head or something like that to a creature. You just take this thing and Git bash it into something interesting. Just, you know, to break up your routine, try something different in your daily practice or whatever. Get some inspiration that way. I don't like to see necessarily somebody kit bash insects too much, but, you know, of course I'm a little bit of a snob. But because then they start putting, you know, mantis parts on an ant and mix it with a beetle, and it looks kind of ridiculous if you know what you're looking at after a while. But, you know, if you're doing an alien or something like that, you know, kit bashing some 3D insect parts are kind of fun. Well, that's a good question, Alex. I'm going to say a little bit. I mean, the team that I work for, when we're doing like a title sequence to a movie or this animated title sequence, um, to a movie or a TV show or something like that, the deadlines in those things, the turnaround could be so incredibly tight, like maybe a matter of days, that sometimes we can throw out some, and then you got to get a reaction from the client as fast as possible. Remember, the client's usually like directing a movie, and the title sequence might be an afterthought until the very end when it suddenly becomes all important. So in that case, you used AI a little bit here and there to generate maybe like mood boards, or the starting of a mood board. And a mood board is just a storyboard without a story. It's a storyboard that shows the general gist of the sequence. And there's a lot of time in that invested in that part. And I think for a few times, I haven't done it with AI, but some of the guys I've worked for. But again, it's like at an early stage when we're just kind of spitballing and throwing stuff at the wall, trying to get something onto the screen as fast as possible, which in a way, it's like a lot of times the same thing. It's like take movie models from like Turbo Squid or something like that, really crappy models, and just kit bash them and bang them into shape until we have something that we can work with. And then they have like me come in and take those crappy models and turn them into something nice, or use them just as a placeholder, and then I build something on top of it, or replace it with something. So I've seen them use AI a little bit like that. I forget which movie it was that the producers thought it would be a really neat trick to do the entire title sequence with AI, and it really didn't go over very well. People hated it. I forget which movie that was. I think it had been sort of a Marvel-related movie from just a few years ago. Or a TV show, I can't remember. That's looking pretty good. Let's do the abdomen. See if we can nice shots of the underside of the abdomen. It's going to be similar to the thorax. Mostly just color where the fur is yellow. There's a beautiful shot of the wing right here. Well, there are actual ant lions, since you bring it up, and they're cool looking beasties. I don't know. It's like in the context. If it's a fantasy thing, then I don't mind. This is what an actual antlion looks like. It's on my to-do list for cool, creepy things to model. Sort of these ambush bugs. They're really cool. Definitely nightmare fodder. They hide in the sand, and when an ant comes along, they jump out and look. They're sarlaccs, sarlacc pit. Here's some variations of ant lines. But if it's, I'm trying to think of, there's some concept artists that do a really good job of that kind of thing. But the more you know about insect anatomy, the more you understand it, the better job you'll do if you're trying to kit bash something. I think. If you just look at Google images and slap things together, well, then you're going to be slightly better than AI, because that's basically what AI is doing, right? Sorry, my brain stopped for a second. Somewhere I have a really cool paper on ant lions. They're cool on action, but I'm hoping to sculpt one at some point. So the way this is made up is, I have to still have to add that part. Let's do this. I'm going to sample this color. Excuse me, and we'll do get that kind of muddy black going. To hide the wings and the legs here. It's fun. Well, the person I'm doing this for, this is sort of just a joint project. They wanted a naked version of the Bumblebee with realistic stuff to it. But there's also, you can see, it depends on the bee. This one's pretty fuzzy. But in some cases, like on the underside, you could see a little bit. But you can also use the, creating masking uses the those pores as actually a spot to generate their furs from. You can see on the legs, it's going to be a bit more visible because the hair is thinner. But I would say, yeah, I mean, I probably could have gone away with much less detail in the abdomen, but I still wanted to kind of put it in there. I mean, you can see it right here, but of course this is a dead bee and the fur is kind of matted. On the underside, where there's less fur, it makes sense to have that kind of detail. If you could see it better, yeah. I think what I'm going to do is there's black on there that we can see through the fur. So I'm going to do kind of like stripes in the top and leave the back here a little bit black. I'll probably do, depending on how I end up doing the fur and the final bug, is come into ZBrush, or I could do it in Substance and basically paint maps for the fur. I mean, for like Yeti, you would paint a map for like density, and you could paint a map for length. They could just be grayscale images. Whoa, that was weird. Grayscale images showing where you want the fur to be more dense or less dense. Those things can be generated really quickly, of course. So I'll probably do that eventually. It's not so much interesting to watch because it's just a grayscale image. You're just painting white where you want something more dense, gray where you want less dense, and black where you don't want any density. Or same with length. And then the color, the base color, you can use that, plug that into the fur. I was using Yeti a lot a few years ago, and of course now I haven't had a chance to touch it in a while, so I had to go back and relearn it. I think ZBrush and Maya are the only two programs I don't constantly have to relearn. Well, that's not true. Every time they change ZBrush. You can see the color kind of abruptly. I mean, you can see on the sides here, we don't have as much fur. We have a little bit of like light color on the edges here, so I might dial that in. And for that, just to be a little bit consistent, I'm going to use some of this pale color right here. It's orange, maybe make it less saturated. Do auto groups here. We can take advantage of mask by polygroup. Pardon, my computer froze for a second there, but it's back now. Okay. I'm curious how many of y'all actually go out to see movies in the theaters these days. I'm still doing it every once in a while. Light color on the edges can be a fall-off effect. Some surface scattering of light, like velvet fabrics. Also, short hairs can create such effect, but I guess hand painting is color symbol. Well, this is going to have a shader and as well as fur in it in the final. But I like to have a little bit in there as well, just to give it an extra boost. And this is also stuff that could be plugged into different channels of the shader. But I appreciate your advice. I mean, I think there is actual discoloration in the exoskeleton, especially in the older insects when you get to the edges here. So I like to have that as well. What are you normally rendering with, Nick? Are you using Redshift or Arnold or Octane or something like that? And what do you use for fur? I've had to sculpt food before for projects. I had to sculpt some dog food and dog biscuits one time. And I had to do some ears of corn for a project that was miserable because they kept changing the reference on me. I don't think that client's ever calling me again. I had to do some pomegranates for the Dune Prophecy opening titles, and I'm trying to think of other food stuff that I've done before. Oh, very, very early on in my career, we did an animation of somebody eating a hamburger and showed it going through the entire digestive system. But that was pretty terrible animation because, like I said, this is like pre-ZBrush, so it was rough. It's not a great animation. It was fun to do though. Yeah, I use V-Ray, Arnold. I haven't used Corona, but I've used Octane and Redshift. And back in the day, I had used Mental Ray. I used to have to do jobs with Maya software. So yeah, I use a lot of the Fresnel. But it's like the better ingredients you have going into the shader, the better your result you're going to get from the shader. The other thing is taking the time to go through here and really examine what's going on. Poly painting, it's not just a matter of getting paint onto the model. I'm also studying what the model looks like, so that when I get to the point of rendering it, a lot of these subtle details that I spent extra time painting on the model is something that I can keep in mind when I'm designing the shaders and that kind of thing. Yeah, it is kind of like you have a bit more control over where the colors are. And since this is sort of a quasi personal project. I mean, I'm working with a scientist on this, but we don't have a tight deadline or anything. So I have extra time to kind of just play with it and experiment with that. I wouldn't necessarily get working on a job with a tight deadline. So sometimes I take advantage of that. But I do enjoy working with shading. That's one of my favorite parts of the process is developing shaders and that kind of stuff. Getting to kind of a Zen thing. And my wife Irene and I are working more and more with Unreal, trying to get more towards real-time rendering. It's hard though because after you spend years working on techniques for getting realistic looking lighting and stuff, and using software rendering or renders like Arnold or Redshift or V-Ray, it's hard to, when you switch over to something like Unreal, you got to work extra hard to make it look realistic, and it's still, especially if you're going for like specific macro work, it still takes a lot of work to get similar results, the results that I'm used to. But in the long run, it's worth it. It cuts down on the render time. And I think it's where the industry is going to, so outside of AI, of course. Take a look at my abdomen here, if we can find that. I mean, I'm also using reference from several different bees in several different situations. I mean, it's the same species, but obviously individuals can vary. So this one looks like it has a little kind of a gold kind of thing going on at the edges here. Currently, no, there's no way to unwrap as UDIMs in ZBrush. I wish there were. Basically, ZBrush you can import UVs that use UDIMs into ZBrush. You won't necessarily see them displayed correctly if you do like a UV morph or something like that, but you can import and export UDIMs. There's just no way to see it in ZBrush at the moment. I know it's something that they've been working on improving the UV system for years now, but I think it's still in the works. Hopefully in the future we'll see some real UV tools in ZBrush, because that's, a pain. Importing and exporting UVs in ZBrush can be a bit laborious, but I use UDIMs all the time. So what I'll usually do is do a quick UV unfold in ZBrush and go into something like Maya and work on making better UVs in Maya, and then re-import them into ZBrush. I'll import the UVs into ZBrush and maybe export the base color maps and displacement sometimes if I'm using displacement, and then bring the color maps and the model into Substance, and then finish working on all the texture maps in Substance. I have a nice pipeline going with my wife, Irene, who's very talented with Substance. She's a great texture artist. So we work together on that kind of thing. But yeah, when ZBrush, if I could just do some of the unfolding and ranging in ZBrush, it would definitely save a few steps, especially with UDIMs. I would say, Marcelo, keep checking back with ZBrush, because in a future update, I know they will eventually implement that, because that's what they want to do. That's a little bit too much. If you know, how would you approach something like this for printing, taking into consideration the fibers, or just fake the fibers in the body and also adding volume to the body? Okay, so that's a really good question, Alex. So I've done a lot of stuff for a company in Australia called CDM Studio Perth, and I did a lot of models for them that I 3D printed. But fur is something that, so here's here's a good example. So this is the actual final model, right? It's 3D printed. They actually attached the fur on their artist after it's 3D printed, the same way they did the painting on it. So I didn't provide the fur on that one. And I've done their models that are, so these are renders. I think these are Keyshot. No, this is Redshift in ZBrush. So these are renders in ZBrush, but I didn't provide the fibers for them. They kind of stuck them on by hand. For something like a Bumblebee or something like that, I don't know if there's any printers right now that can really handle that. I think most part, here's a nice image of the actual finished model. So I did a lot of these models in ZBrush and shipped it to them digitally, and they did the printing and the painting on them. And they're at this museum, which I have never been to because I'm not in Australia, but yeah, I don't have a good answer to that question right now. I think for the most part, people are printing the models without the hairs and then adding the hairs manually. Yes, but remember that worker bees are sterile females, so they're cute little gals. Yeah, I used to be like, well, I'm still into ants. I love ants. Ants are some of the coolest organisms on the planet to study. But bees have sort of taken my heart as my favorite. Right now, the orchid bee is my favorite. I think it's just beautiful. I have so many great books on bees. This is kind of cool. This monster book right here, this is just on flies. So a lot of flies out there. A lot of people don't appreciate the intense diversity of flies. That's just flies. Um, I have some really good ones on bees. Let me pull a couple here. This is just a nice one for visual reference, you know. I think. I'll hold it up to the camera. Yeah, this one right here. Then of course, you have to have the. Most of my insect books are still in boxes somewhere. And there's certain books that you have to have on bees, like the Snodgrass reference, and that's a lot of the images. My illustrations come from that. It's a really cool book if you really want to get super nerdy, called Honeybee Democracy, and that is a pretty dense volume on concerning the biology of bees and how they reach decisions within the nest, specifically with regards to finding a new nest, how they decide, you know, when a nest gets too big, it literally has to split in half, and so the virgin queens fly off, or a virgin queen flies off with a number of workers, and they start a new nest. It's like nest mitosis, or, you know, but you know how they go about finding a new nest and then coming back, and they hold like basically little elections. They do that little famous bee dance to tell each other where the new nest is, and then basically candidates compete. Do you know anyone doing these kinds of detailed, scientific, accurate macro models for botany subjects? No, but it's a really cool area. I mean, there's a lot of people doing plants, you know. I mean, obviously there's like speed tree is a go-to application for some vegetation, but generally, like you said, that's not necessarily botany so much as it's making plants for visual effects. I think there are some out there, but I don't know personally. My wife Irene is a botanist. She knows a lot about plants, a lot more than I do. Everywhere we go, they seem to have plants pop up. But I don't know. It's a really cool topic. I mean, you know, there's so many things in biology that you could specialize in just studying using 3D modeling and sculpting as a tool. You know, birds come to mind. Obviously, dinosaurs. A lot of people doing dinosaurs because everybody loves dinosaurs. I mean, I started getting into bugs about 10 or 12, maybe 15 years ago, because I realized there was a niche market and there wasn't that many people devoting a whole lot of time to it, you know, beyond just making the odd bug here or there for a movie or some stuff. But now it's they're starting to get more and more people doing it, getting some competition out there from some really amazing artists. Yeah, I haven't seen anybody go out and really model like an orchid or something like that, like 100% accurately. My wife could do it. She knows a lot about flowers, and she's a very talented ZBrush artist herself, as well as texture artist. I did teach an online class, private class to some artists at the Smithsonian. I've done that a couple times. A few years ago, there's some botanists in there. So I don't know. Maybe you'll start to see some more of that kind of stuff, but Yeah, she's multi-talented. I worked at Bad Robot, and then I worked at Filmograph and Prologue Films, and Imaginary Forces, and but I think Bad Robot was the biggest studio that I worked for. I haven't worked for Marvel. A little bit annoyed that I didn't get anybody calls for doing Ant-Man, but whatever. I'm not in LA anymore, so LA got way, way too expensive and way, way too flammable. But you know what? There's still time. I don't think it can. So I have Pure Ref over here right now, and you know I don't know what I just did. There we go. The hotkey for the sampling is C, but I think it can only do stuff that's in ZBrush. But you might be able to bring in an image into Spotlight and sample it from there. So if you took your images out of the exported from PureRef and brought it into Spotlight, then you could sample it from there. Looks pretty good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my let's save this real quick. Oh, I did do some work for the mill. That's another place I worked at. I'm trying to think of what else. I haven't worked at ILM or anything like that. I've had some students when I was teacher at Noman who went on to Disney and ILM and other studios. They're really big studios, not really for me though. It's not my cup of tea. It gets into too much corporate politics and that kind of thing. And I had a friend who some of you guys probably know, Jared Kuchevsky, who's really talented ZBrush artist and creature artist. And he's been in Aaron Sims forever. And then he got a job at ILM and went up there for a few months and just really did not like it at all. And then came back to Aaron Sims. That's the story he told me. It was very interesting. Okay, as far as I know, the color sampler in ZBrush, right, holding the C key, will pick any color from the interface, right? If there's a trick to do it in PureRef, I don't know what it is. Maybe you know more than I do on that. Let's see. The color modifiers. Alternate. Might be a Z plugin. The only way I've done it is Z color. Yeah. This is a nice way to store colors, but yeah, I don't know if there's a way to do it. Maybe it's a hotkey, I don't know. Alt C. Nope. Control C is copy. I don't know. I'd have to ask Paul Gabriel on that one. That seems like a little known ZBrush thing. Let's see if I go up here. I'm going to do. It's sort of a fiber mesh preview. That's not actually what the final fur is going to look like, but definitely fatter with the bee fuzz. That looks pretty terrible. And I just quickly fill these legs with dark black color. I'll probably do a bit more work on the legs just to make them look a bit more interesting. You can see with just black, they're not that much to look at. Then the wings, these are going to be a bit more obviously transparent. I'm going to fill them with just the light color like this for now. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. All right, so I think I'm going to call it a night for me because it's night where I am. And I think I'll be here next week talking more bugs. I think I will go back to working my katydid model. I also have a longhorn beetle that I was working on for a while. So I should really finish those guys up before starting anything new. Katydid model, let me see, I'll open that one up, see where I left off. Yeah, this is my cartoony katydid. So I'll go back to this guy next week, finish him up. Maybe do a little bit more sculpting on it at some point, but he's kind of a cool one. So thanks for joining me tonight. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys have a good night, or a good day, or wherever you are, and I'll see you next time.